Hey guys, happy Thursday. I hope you all have had a good week so far. So yesterday you watched the crash course video on Buddhism and the kind of the beliefs behind it. We're going to dive a little more in depth with that. So before we get started, if you would, there should have been a page in the module where you were able to open up these notes for me. So if you would have these opened up on your computers, and we will go through them here in a second. But for now, just have them opened up and in a separate tab. That way you can open them when you need it. So we will go ahead and get started. And so we have talked about Hinduism lately and the beliefs behind it. Hinduism with the caste system, with the Varnas, the Vedas, all that stuff. So eventually, people started to kind of, I don't want to say question, but kind of wonder whether this system was necessary, whether there was another way to reach moksha, as they call it, or that enlightenment. And so eventually this prince, who you saw in the video, his name was Siddhartha Gautama, decided that he wanted to find the meaning of life. He kind of realized that the Hinduism didn't really give him a good take on what the meaning of life was, and he wanted to know more. So he set out to find what the meaning of life was. So what you'll see here is a series of quotes from some of his teachings that at first on their own may not make much sense, but you will notice that they kind of have similar words used, similar phrases, and so on. So I will show 4 of these and we'll talk about them. So the first one is, our life is shaped by our mind. We become what we think. Suffering follows an evil thought as the wheels of a cart follow the ox that draw it. On its own, doesn't make much sense. But next one, our life is shaped by our mind. We become what we think. Joy follows a pure thought like a shadow that never leaves. So again, doesn't make much sense, but notice how it brings about our mind again in both of these. So the next one, from desire comes grief, from desire comes fear. One who is free from desire knows neither grief nor fear. And then the last one, attachment to objects of desire brings grief. Attachment to objects of desire brings fear. One who is free of attachment knows neither grief nor fear. And these are all from the Buddhist religious text, the Dhammapada? Yeah, that one. And so basically what you'll see here is the first 2 talk about our minds, like people's minds, their spirits, that kind of thing, and how suffering is an evil thought. We become what we think, so on. The next 2 talk about desire and grief, how they both lead to different things, but if you are free from desire, you know neither grief nor fear. But if you are attached to objects that bring grief or desire, you don't know either one of those. And so that is kind of the brief idea behind Hinduism or Buddhism, and we will talk more about that here in a second. So this story of Buddhism centers around a man by the name of Siddhartha Gautama. You should have recognized his name from the video yesterday. He was the prince who was born into a kshatriya varna, which meant he was a prince. So he was expected to become the next king of his city-state. So he was born into privilege, born into money, had everything he could ever want, that kind of wealth. But the problem is, his parents had a dream, a vision, whatever you want to call it, that if he ever left his house, he would bring dishonor, misfortune, and just overall bad karma to his family. So they kept him locked in their house for the first 20-something years of his life. Wasn't allowed to leave, couldn't go outside, but being the wealthy prince that he was, he had just about everything he could ever want. So he's locked in his house, but he gets anything else he wants. Doesn't sound good, but it could be worse. Eventually, though, like one would think, he starts to question what's going on outside of his house, what's going outside his little bubble. And so, being the teenager, early 20s, something that he is, he decided to do the exact opposite of what his parents told him to do, and he left his house. So he went out looking for what life was, journeyed outside his home to find out what was going on in the world, that kind of thing. So, as he began his journey, he came across a couple things that kind of stood out to him as a little, not odd, but a little concerning. He came across a sick person, and by sick I mean like probably like dying, kind of sick. He came across an old man, and then he also came across a dead person. And so he started wondering, will this eventually happen to me? Am I going to eventually become sick and die of old age? Like, what does this mean for me? And so he wanted to know what he could do to make sure most of these things in his life didn't happen. He wanted to make the most of his life before all of this started happening. And so he decided that he was going to try and find the meaning of life and what our purpose is in life, how do we get there, how do we find the answer to all that stuff. So he decided he was going to meditate under a tree for 49 days. He sat there, meditated for 49 days. On the 49th day, he had this moment where his life kind of clicked, if you will. He kind of realized what the meaning of life was. He realized his purpose. He realized all those big life questions that we kind of talk about, the like aha moment of, I get it. I understand it. I figured it out. And he called that moment nirvana. Or you might also see it called enlightenment. He reached enlightenment. He found the meaning of life. And it only took him 49 days of meditating under a tree to do it. He also, as part of his journey to find the meaning of life, discovered a couple things. He says that the meaning of life was suffering. From the minute we're born to the minute we die, we're just constantly suffering. He said that was the meaning of life. Suffering was inevitable. He also realized that people suffer because they have desires, both physical desires and spiritual ones. And so he also came up with a solution to that problem. To escape the suffering, one had to remove those physical and spiritual desires. For him, that meant getting rid of all of his stuff. Any physical possessions he had besides the clothes he was wearing, he sold, donated, got rid of, whatever. All of it gone. He gave up all of his physical possessions, all of his physical desires, so that they would not tempt him anymore. He also gave up his spiritual connections as well, because he was also at this point still a practicing Hindu, which meant he believed in the caste system, he believed in the Varnas, the Vedas, all of that. And part of that was that being a Kshatriya, he was in line to become king once his father died. But once he did this, he gave up all claims to his throne. He didn't want it no more. He saw it as a spiritual desire that he did not need anymore in his life. He did not want. And so he gave it all up. Seems a little strange, seems a little odd to us, but that is what he decided he wanted to do. That was how he would end suffering, make his life better, and stay in that state of nirvana or enlightenment. And then he also, well, before we go any further, after he did all this, he became formally known as the Buddha or Enlightened One. So his actual name was Siddhartha Gautama, But once he found the meaning of life and suffering and all of this, he became known as the Buddha or the Enlightened One. So Siddhartha and the Buddha are actually the same person. It's just he becomes known as the Buddha after he reaches what he called nirvana or enlightenment. So he came up with 4 noble truths, as he called them, to help us kind of figure out how to reach and then maintain that state of nirvana. Now, this is where you need to pull up that note sheet that I showed you at the beginning and start filling this in. You only need to write what is over here. So the first one, and they'll go in the appropriate boxes, like one will go in 1, 2, and 2, that so on. He said that number 1, the life, it has inevitable suffering, that life is just, we're going to suffer in life. There's no way around it. We cannot avoid suffering. 2, there is a cause to our suffering. There is a cause as to why people suffer, and that is because we have those desires that we were talking about, this physical desires, those spiritual desires. That is what causes our suffering. 3, he says that there is a way to end that suffering if you take the necessary steps to remove those desires from your life, both the physical and the spiritual ones. We can help eliminate those desires and eventually, he believed, eliminate the suffering that goes with them. Now, he realized that this would be difficult. It was difficult for him to do, and so naturally it would be difficult for us to do as well. So he created an 8-fold path that would help us reach and maintain enlightenment, maintain the nirvana, as he called it. So again, the 4 boxes, fill those in, and then we will go on to the next page. If you need to pause the video here to fill these in, feel free to do so. And then I will go on to the next one. So his 8-fold path, as he called it, was right thought, right intent, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. He thought and believed that if we practice all 8 of these, and I know it says 1 through 4, but the way this formatted it wouldn't let me do it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He said that if we practice all of these, we would be able to ideally reach and maintain that state of nirvana, as he called it. So these were just guides to kind of help us stay on the path towards enlightenment. So again, if you need to pause the video here to kind of write these down, that is fine. I think we have 1 or 2 more slides I'm going to try and get through. So if you'll bear with me, we will go on. So how does this relate back to Hinduism? Several of the Buddha's teachings directly challenge the beliefs of Hinduism and the Vedas. The Buddha called his teachings Dharma, or cosmic law, whereas Hindus use the term Dharma to refer to one's duty. So Buddha calls his teachings, these 8-fold paths, the noble truths, the Dharma, or just cosmic law, whereas Hindus refer to Dharma as like one's duty, the role you do in your caste system. That is your duty. Like the job that your caste system has, that is the one that you are expected to maintain. That is your Dharma. Buddhists also, like Hindus, believe in karma, though they believe it has no input on our next life. If you remember, we said Hinduism, they believe that with good karma, they will eventually be born into a higher caste or a lower caste, depending on if it's bad karma, whereas Buddhists believe that karma still exists. It just has no influence on whether we move up or down in the caste, because Buddhists don't believe in the caste system. They don't see the need for the caste system. They don't believe in gods like Hindus do. So they don't believe in the need to maintain a caste system. They didn't see the need for a special group of priests like the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas and all, they didn't see the need for those. They didn't see the need for the separation that the caste system brought. And so therefore the role of karma doesn't mean much to them. So what happened to Buddhism and to the Buddha and Buddhism? The Buddha continued his newfound teachings until he died in roughly around 480 BC. His teachings would eventually split into 3 different branches and would spread to places outside of India like China, Japan, and other countries in Southeast Asia. Buddhism for a long time would eventually vanish from India, but will slowly make a return, and today is vastly outnumbered today in India compared to just overall Hindus. So eventually Buddhism kind of dies out in India, but is spread to places like China, Japan, and other Southeast Asian countries. So that is all I have for you. So if you would, once you finish your notes, you may take a screenshot of those and post it in the assignment tab, and that will be your assignment for today. And then I will have new material for you all tomorrow. If you have any questions or you need me to explain this further, something still doesn't make sense, shoot me an email. I am more than happy to help you guys walk you through this a little bit more detail. I know I kind of did this pretty quick, but I wanted to keep the video as short and concise as possible. But if something doesn't make sense and you need me to explain a little bit more, shoot me an email, let me know, and I will be more than happy to help you all. Other than that, that is all I have for you all. So I hope you guys have a good rest of the day, and I will see you all tomorrow.